We're on acts returned by the governor, page 6. Senator from Charleston, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, before we begin these, if I get the attention of the body, in light of the court decisions, it appears very clear to me that parliamentary-wise that all vetoes will require at least 24 senators participating, of which the 2/3 vote must come from the 24 plus. And I just want the members to be aware of that as we head to these vetoes.
And Senator, my point is I understand that for vetoes, but what the question that wasn't asked is just for a regular vote of the Senate. What happens if there's a quorum here, but as sometimes happens, there's a vote without a quorum because people are outside the chamber and nobody made a quorum call? It's a very interesting question to think about.
Yes, sir, but it's a question of a majority, and unless the rule says a majority of those present and voting or a majority of the membership, it's a majority of what's here. And if the point of order isn't raised as to a quorum, the court cannot, in my opinion, under the Constitution, and this is why I warned some of those who wanted to go down the road of embodying in law procedures. You're inviting judges and lawyers to get involved in controlling procedures and creating a field of litigation for lawyers.
You can't do it.
Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry, if the chair pleases.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, since this is the first veto we've dealt with this legislative session, in light of the Supreme Court's recent decision in the case of Board of Trustees of the School District of Fairfield County versus the state of South Carolina, what is your interpretation now of the required vote for the House to override a veto of the governor?
Thank you, Representative Lucas, for asking the question. As many of you know, the Supreme Court issued an opinion this past August striking down the General Assembly's long-established interpretation of the law relating to the vote necessary to override a veto. This was done in a case that involved Act 308 of 2010, a piece of local legislation passed by this body in February 2010, and which this body overrode the governor's veto in March 2010. While the particular legislation at issue in this case involves local legislation, the court's decision has a much further reaching impact that affects the required vote on all questions before this body regarding overriding a governor's veto. Many of you know that I don't agree with the court's decision in this case. I believe that the decision overrules long-established precedent of this body as well as the court's prior decisions. While I strongly disagree with the decision of the court, I also recognize that our government was established by the founders of this great country and state to put in place a system of checks and balances. In this system, the judicial branch is given the authority and responsibility to interpret the law, and in this case, that law is our South Carolina Constitution. Thus, we must abide by the court's decision, and that is why I have made my best effort to interpret the court's decision so that it can be implemented into the voting procedures of this House. I've devoted a great deal of time in the months since the court's decision in an attempt to interpret exactly what the court meant. Unfortunately, even after lengthy consultation with our various in-house counsel, as well as various private outside counsel, I have been unable to come to a definitive conclusion as to the court's intent. Please know that I attempted to resolve this confusion and requested that the court provide much needed clarification to their decision. Clarification I felt was necessary in order to implement the court's decision into our voting process. Unfortunately, the court denied this clarification, and that has left us in the dilemma we're in today. I'm afraid it is impossible to come to a definitive conclusion of the court's intent. Thus, what I have done is come to a conclusion and interpretation based on my best efforts to understand the court's ruling and the advice of legal counsel. I assure you that I did not come to this conclusion lightly, but I believe it is the most accurate reflection of the court's decision based on the limited guidance we currently have available. Thus, the necessary vote to override a governor's veto in the House is an affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of those members present and voting, with a minimum of at least 2/3 of a quorum of the body voting in the affirmative to override. Thus, assuming the House has 124 elected members, a quorum of the House would be 63. A 2/3 majority of this quorum would be 42. Therefore, the necessary vote to override a veto of the governor would be an affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of those members present and voting, with a minimum of at least 42 members voting in the affirmative to override. Any vote to override that does not meet this standard will be sustained. After lengthy consideration, I firmly believe this is the most straightforward of all the possible interpretations of the court's ruling. I will also reiterate that I do not agree with the court's decision in this case. However, I believe this interpretation complies with the court's intent as best as we can discern their intent and language of the court's decision. Our system of government requires that we abide by that decision. Again, my ruling is that the necessary vote to override a veto in the House is an affirmative vote of at least 2/3 of those members present and voting, with a minimum of at least 2/3 of a quorum of the body voting in the affirmative to override. Any vote to override that does not meet this standard will be sustained. We have a couple of new members that we wish to welcome to the House. We read across the desk just a moment ago the election commissions or the certification of their election, and we would like to have those members come up one at a time to be sworn into the House. The first member we'll bring up is Representative Joshua Putnam. Joshua, come on up. Or excuse me, Representative Putnam, come on up. Representative-elect Eddie Southard would please come to the podium. Representative Southard, if you would put your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I am duly qualified according to the Constitution of this state to exercise the duties of the office to which I have been elected. And that I will, to the best of my ability, discharge the duties thereof. And preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of this state and of the United States. So help me God. Congratulations, Representative Southern. Good to have you with us. Wave the crowd. I'm talking to you. You wave to the crowd.
I've been asked several questions about what is happening with appointments and elections to some of the boards and the commissions. In our statutes, several agencies, boards, or commissions have members based on congressional districts. These statutes need to be amended because South Carolina was allocated a new congressional district. although where it is located might change in the lawsuit. And as all of you know by now, we are now in court, in federal court. Under the expedited order that we have for handling the case, this case would be tried around the week of February the 21st. And so, so consequently, you know, those lines, they hold. If they don't hold, they may not hold. I don't know. But in either case, now is the time to get the statutes changed to include the new congressional districts. Today, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I introduced a skeletal bill that contains all of the boards and commissions under the jurisdiction of the Senate Judiciary Committee pursuant to the Senate rules. The amendment that the subcommittee will propose will only deal with the membership of each organization in order to accommodate the new additional congressional district. I would recommend and urge all of the other chairmen of the standing committees here in the Senate who need to amend the statutes under your committee jurisdiction to propose similar legislation so that hopefully we can get this done, passed by both houses, and signed by the governor as soon as possible. On that note, I would urge you, because regardless of what occurs in court, it is that we're going to have 7 districts. So the statutes generically, and they do reference some how many. Some of the statutes are automatic. They say corresponding to the number of congressional districts per the latest decennial census. But lastly, I would urge the Senate and urge the committees not to send out to the floor for confirmation and to carry over all appointments that are based on congressional districts until 1, the statutes are upgraded, and number 2, that the lawsuit will have been dispensed with and over one way or another, and we'll know where we are. And that's the best advice that I can give you based upon all of my counsel with learned counsel.
Bottom of page 6, H3066. We have amendments on the desk. Clerk will publish the First Amendment. Senator Pickens, what purpose do you rise? Senator Pickens is recognized on a point of personal interest.
Well, Mr. President, on the pending amendment.
Speaking on the pending amendment.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I won't be very long. I'm not even sure what the next amendment. Senator from Orangeburg's amendment hadn't been published yet. There we go. I'm speaking on Senator from Orangeburg's amendment. Let me just say, we're back where we finished up last year, where we stopped last session. And I wanted to make a few brief comments because I know everybody's about ready to go. I do think that it's very important that we commit ourselves or resolve to complete work on this bill next week. Senator from Beaufort, Senator Davis, Senator from Edgefield, I think maybe the senator from Kershaw. There's several folks working on a comprehensive amendment. They need a little bit of time this week. It's worked out very well, this comprehensive amendment that they've talked about, and I'm hoping they've working in a lot of the amendments. We've already adopted a number of things, you know, the phase out the Budget Control Board, the separate agency. I'm getting a lot of emails from citizens around South Carolina concerned about the public benefits agency portion of the which is now under the Budget Control Board that manages the health insurance, the retirement system. Seems to be a huge concern that be handled separately from the Department of Administration. And I know the Senator from Beaufort will address that in his amendment. And hopefully, as we get to that amendment next week, we can deal with that and come together on at least a framework that we can move forward and make good progress on this bill next week. I think this would set the stage, Mr. President Pro Tem, for a very good session to get this bill out of the way. Very important piece of restructuring legislation that, you know, was dealt with toward the end of the session last year, and we just couldn't quite finish it. We had a lot on our plate with redistricting, with the budget, Senator from Florence, to finishing up the budget conference and all that. It just takes a lot of time. But here we are, first week of the session.